Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in to take on a giant of Western culture, a composer whose name is synonymous with, well, with structural perfection, with profound expression, and this incredible musical architecture, Johann Sebastian Bach.
Born March 31st, 1685. He composed a body of work. I mean, the Brandenburg Concertos, the Mass in B minor, the Goldberg Variations, that now sits at the absolute foundation of classical music.
It really does.
Yet here's the paradox we have to start with. The icon we celebrate today was, for the vast majority of his professional life, known primarily as a stunningly brilliant organist and teacher.
Right, not a composer whose works were everywhere.
Not at all. His music had what's been called an extremely narrow circulation.
Exactly. If you were a music fan in Leipzig in, say, 1740, you might know Bach as the excellent, if maybe a little demanding, choir director at St. Thomas.
For sure.
You would probably consider Telemann or Handel the great contemporary composers of the day. Bach's music, by comparison, it was just seen as dense, challenging, and, well, frankly, a little old-fashioned by the time he died.
He was a working professional. He was navigating the tough landscape of late Baroque Germany, constantly vying for better pay, for autonomy, for security, for his massive family. I mean, he was the progenitor of harmony who kept getting into fights with the city council.
That's the part that's so fascinating. So our mission today is to explore that journey. We want to understand how this intensely structured, highly ambitious local Thuringian musician transformed into a global, timeless giant. We're going deep into the personal, the professional, and the intellectual tenacity that defined his career.
And how his unwavering focus on structure really codified the future of Western music itself.
Before we jump in, you mentioned a note about the dates, which I think is a great place to start.
Yes, just a quick but crucial contextual note. Bach was born on March 21st, 1685, according to the Julian calendar, the Old Style, which was still in use in parts of Protestant Germany. But when those regions finally adopted the Gregorian calendar, or the New Style, his birthday translated to March 31st, 1685. It's a minor complexity, but it immediately grounds us in this historical reality that Bach lived right on the edge of major temporal and cultural transitions.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the concept of the Bach family. I mean, it's less a family and more a self-perpetuating musical guild.
That's the perfect way to put it.
All concentrated in this very specific, culturally insular region of Thuringia in central Germany.
That's it. The Bach lineage is traditionally traced back to a baker named Vitus Veit Bach, who died in 1619. But the family produced this remarkable string of professional musicians for 3, maybe 4 generations.
Wow.
They were organists, court chamber musicians, town musicians. This wasn't a hobby for them. This was the family business, deeply ingrained in the regional administrative and religious structures.
And his father, Johann Ambrosius Bach, he was the director of the town musicians in Eisenach. So Sebastian grew up in an environment where music wasn't just, available.
No, it was the air he breathed.
It was the language he was expected to master from birth.
Exactly. And this creates a fascinating context for his early life. He wasn't trained at a major cultural center like Berlin or Vienna. He was trained within this very insular yet musically rigorous family system.
But that foundational security was completely shattered when he was orphaned at age 10.
A devastating blow. His mother died in 1694, and then his father followed just 8 months later in February 1695.
That must have been a pivotal moment.
Absolutely. The young Sebastian moves in with his elder brother, Johann Christoph, who was the organist at St. Michael's Church in Ohrdruf. Johann Christoph essentially becomes his guardian and his first serious music teacher. He's giving him lessons on the clavichord, exposing him to this broader European repertoire of the time.
And this guardianship, this is where we get to that legendary anecdote, the forbidden study, which tells us so much about Bach's intrinsic intellectual drive, even as a kid.
The determination is the key word. Scores in the late 17th century were not easily mass-produced. They were valuable, often unique manuscripts, and ledger paper itself was expensive.
You couldn't just print it out.
Not at all. The story, which was passed down through the family, is that Johann Christoph had this cabinet containing scores by some of the greatest composers. German masters like Corel, Pachelbel, Buxtehude.
And Reinken.
And Reinken, yes. As well as foreign influences like the Frenchman Lully and Marchand and the Italian Frescobaldi.
And his brother forbids him from accessing them.
He did, most likely because of their value and the proprietary nature of the music. But Sebastian, just compelled by his own curiosity, would sneak the manuscripts out, copy them by moonlight.
By moonlight?
Literally straining his eyesight, which may have contributed to his future problems, and then he'd carefully return them. This self-directed copying was foundational for him. It wasn't just transcription, it was immersion. He was building his library and his mental database of compositional techniques, brick by brick, against his brother's wishes.
And that same tenacity, it just carries right into his early professional life. After a short stint in Weimar, he lands his first significant organist post in Arnstadt in 1703.
Right.
And then, at just 20 years old, he undertakes what sounds like an impossible professional sabbatical, the walk to Lübeck.
This truly sets the tone for his scholarly rigor. In 1705, Bach requested 4 months' leave from his job in Arnstadt. His destination was Lübeck, on the northern coast, 450 kilometers away.
That's about 280 miles each way.
Each way. And he reportedly made this journey on foot, twice.
So that's nearly 600 miles round trip in the middle of winter. This isn't a casual trip. This is a focused pilgrimage. What was the driving force?
He was driven by an absolute need to learn from the undisputed masters of the North German organ tradition, Diederik Buxtehude and Johann Reinken. Bach was seeking not just to hear them perform, but a direct tutelage. He wanted to watch them improvise, learn their registration techniques, and just soak up the traditions that had developed in the North outside his native Thuringia.
And that dedication clearly paid off. I mean, culminating in that reported compliment from Reinken years later.
Oh, yes. 15 years later, in 1720, Bach demonstrated his improvisatory brilliance for Reinken in Hamburg, and the aging master recordedly remarked, "I thought that this art was dead, but I see that it lives in you."
That's the ultimate validation for that grueling journey. The masters recognize the successor.
It is.
But this incredible ambition and scholarly focus also brought him into conflict with his employers almost immediately. Even in Arnstadt, he was accused of adding strange turns to his playing, confusing the singers. Was this just youthful arrogance, or was it the sound of a genius pushing the envelope?
It was absolutely the sound of a genius grappling with a new harmonic reality. This conflict in Arnstadt, it signals that Bach was already pushing harmonic boundaries. He was experimenting with bolder modulations and more dissonant chords than conventional church music allowed.
And the choir just couldn't keep up.
The congregation and, more importantly, the singers, who were less accomplished, literally couldn't follow where his music was going. He was composing for a future system of harmony that his contemporaries hadn't yet embraced.
That's a perfect foreshadowing of his later work. Now, before he moved into the high-stakes world of court composition, we have to acknowledge the sheer human logistics of his life, specifically his family. He had 20 children across 2 marriages.
The family element is so critical, and it's often overlooked in favor of the sheet music. In 1707, while he was in Mühlhausen, he married a second cousin, Maria Barbara Bach. They had 7 children, including 2 of his most important future composer sons, Wilhelm Friedmann and Carl Philipp Emanuel.
And then tragedy struck.
A devastating blow. In 1720, while Bach was away in Carlsbad with Prince Leopold, Maria Barbara died suddenly. He returned to find her already buried. The emotional and logistical strain of losing his partner and being left with several young children, you just can't overstate it.
Which explains why he remarried relatively quickly in 1721 to Anna Magdalena Wilke. I mean, in that era, managing a household of children while holding a demanding job was nearly impossible without a partner.
Absolutely. And Anna Magdalena was a gifted soprano, 16 years his junior. He met her while she was performing at the Köthen court. They went on to have 13 children together. She was more than a wife. She was a partner, a collaborator.
She copied manuscripts for him, didn't she?
She did. She copied manuscripts, helped run the enormous household, and was instrumental in the musical life of the family. The sheer scale of that domestic operation is just vital context for understanding the structural discipline he applied to his music.
Moving into part 2, we're tracking the professional workhorse. This is where Bach's tenacity truly shines, often involving political maneuvering, leveraging jobs, and, most surprisingly, a stint in jail. Let's start with his return to Weimar in 1708.
This second 9-year period in Weimar, from 1708 to 1717, was really an incubator for his instrumental genius. He started as the court organist, a prestigious position. But by 1714, he was promoted to Concertmeister, the director of music.
And that job came with new duties.
It did. It required him to compose a new church cantata every single month for the castle church. This was the true start of his monumental sacred output.
And this is the moment when he fully absorbed and synthesized the Italian style.
Precisely. This was a key time for instrumental music across Europe. Italy, particularly through the work of Antonio Vivaldi, had perfected the concerto. You know, the fast, slow, fast structure, the propulsive rhythmic energy.
That driving beat.
Yes, and the idea of dramatic alternation between solo instruments and the full orchestra, the tutti. Bach didn't just listen to this music, he systematically dismantled it.
How did he do that, practically?
He spent countless hours transcribing Vivaldi's, Corelli's, and Torelli's string concertos for solo harpsichord and organ. By reducing a complex orchestral work to a single keyboard instrument, he had to internalize every structural detail, the counter melodies, the harmonic changes, the rhythmic motor. He wasn't just copying, he was reverse engineering the Italian concerto form.
Which fundamentally transformed his own style.
It did. It's where he gets that rhythmic drive we hear in pieces like the Brandenburg Concertos.
Now, let's get to the true standout anecdote of his professional life. The imprisonment in 1717. The great composer in a jail cell. What on earth was he doing that was so egregious?
He was trying to quit his job for a better one, and his employer wouldn't let him go.
As simple as that.
Pretty much. Bach had accepted a much better paying, more prestigious position as Kapellmeister for Prince Leopold and Köthen, but he hadn't received an honorable discharge from the Duke of Weimar.
And the Duke retaliated by locking him up.
Exactly. The court secretary's report notes that Bach was held for almost a month, from November 6th to December 2nd, for too stubbornly forcing the issue of his dismissal. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a pure professional dispute. He was fighting for his autonomy and his career advancement.
He got an unfavorable discharge, but he got the job.
He got the job. This incident showcases the intense tenacity and, frankly, the business savvy required for a working artist in the Baroque era.
He used jail time as a bargaining chip. The move to Köthen from 1717 to 1723 was a major shift. Since Prince Leopold was a Calvinist, he didn't require the elaborate sacred music that the Lutherans did.
And this was a secular interlude that proved incredibly fertile for his instrumental music. Relieved of the weekly cantata pressure, Bach focused on composing secular chamber and orchestral works.
Like what? What came out of this period?
This is where we get the orchestral suites, the 6 cello suites, the sonatas and partitas for solo violin, and, crucially, the Brandenburg Concertos. He was given the time and the resources to codify these instrumental forms.
And this is where we have to mention the great near miss of musical history. His failure to meet his contemporary, George Friedrich Handel.
Oh, it's a tantalizing historical what-if.
Born the same year, lived so close by.
They were only about 130 kilometers apart. Bach tried to meet Handel twice. In 1719, he traveled 35 kilometers from Köthen to Halle, but Handel had already departed. Just missed him. And then a decade later, in 1730, Bach sent his son, Wilhelm Friedmann, to Halle to extend a personal invitation to Handel to visit him in Leipzig. But Handel declined. They never crossed paths. It just underscores the regional rather than global focus of their careers until much later.
The Köthen period ended abruptly in 1723 when Bach applied for the ultimate sacred music post, Thomaskantor in Leipzig. And this is a humbling moment. He was not their first choice.
Not even close. He was the third choice for what was arguably the leading cantorate in Protestant Germany. The Leipzig Council first offered the job to Georg Philipp Telemann,
who was a huge star at the time.
A huge star. And Telemann used the offer to negotiate a massive pay raise in Hamburg and then declined. Then they offered it to Christoph Graupner, who also used it as leverage and declined.
So Bach was the backup to the backup.
The council settled on Bach, noting somewhat dismissively that if they couldn't get the best, they'd have to settle for a competent option.
Bach took the job that others considered a fallback, and it became the setting for the final 27 years of his life and the production of his greatest vocal masterpieces. What exactly were the duties of this new, massive administrative role?
The responsibilities were immense. He was the director of the St. Thomas School, responsible for the education and housing of the boy choristers. He had to provide music for 4 main churches, St. Thomas, St. Nicholas, the New Church, and St. Peter's, and instruct the students in singing and the Latin curriculum. It was a 247 administrative and artistic burden.
The required output alone is staggering. He had to produce a new, major church cantata for every Sunday and every feast day.
Just think about the logistics of that. A new, complex work requiring singers and an orchestra, often running 20 to 30 minutes every single week, year after year.
He had to compose it, copy out the parts,
Rehearse the students, and conduct the performance. He began office in May 1723 and started his first annual cantata cycle immediately.
And he went on to compile 5 full cycles, composing over 300 cantatas, though sadly over 100 of those are now lost. The physical and mental strain of maintaining that quality and speed must have been extraordinary.
It speaks to his almost superhuman capacity for organization. The second cycle he composed, starting in 1724, focused exclusively on chorale cantatas, with each one based on a single Lutheran hymn. So he's essentially offering a complex theological and musical meditation on that specific hymn's themes.
Like Watch It Off.
Exactly, like Watch It Off, Ruft uns die Stimme. This level of systematic encyclopedic creation is just unmatched.
And all the while, his frustration with the penny-pinching Leipzig City Council, who constantly disputed his budget, salary, and resources, it never ceased.
The bureaucracy was relentless. And to give himself a creative and financial hedge against the church, in 1729, he took on an external secular gig, directing the Collegium Musicum.
Which was a student ensemble, right? Originally founded by Telemann.
That's the one. And this group allowed him to maintain his instrumental chops outside the strict religious calendar. They held weekly 2-hour free concerts at the famous Café Zimmermann in the winter and in the outdoor garden in the summer.
A crucial venue.
It was where he could stage his secular works like the Coffee Cantata, a piece of operatic comedy about coffee addiction, and perform older orchestral pieces, including the Brandenburg Concertos. It was a way for Bach to consolidate his power over the city's secular and sacred music life.
Now let's talk strategy. To gain leverage against the city council, Bach executed a brilliant political maneuver by turning his compositional skills toward the Catholic court in Dresden.
This was pure professional chess. In 1733, Bach composed the Kyrie Gloria Mass in B minor and presented the manuscript directly to Augustus III of Poland, who was the Catholic elector of Saxony, requesting a court title.
He was using his music as political capital.
He was, and it worked. In 1736, he successfully gained the prestigious, non-paying, but crucially influential title of Royal Court Composer,
which gave him leverage.
It gave him official standing with a higher authority than the Leipzig City Council, providing him the professional leverage and diplomatic immunity he needed to fight for better working conditions. He later expanded this Kyrie Gloria Mass into the complete monumental Mass in B minor.
As he moved into his final years, from 1740 to 1750, his style shifted again, showing his ongoing dedication to scholarly pursuits.
He was looking backward and forward simultaneously. His late style consciously incorporated the older polyphonic style antico, the intricate, seamless textures of Renaissance masters like Palestrina and Caldara, into his thoroughly modern harmonic language. He was actively synthesizing musical history.
The Goldberg variations are a perfect example.
Absolutely. Published in 1741, the collection contains 9 complex canons, all based on that one single bass line.
His fame was now reaching the highest intellectual and royal circles, culminating in his famous 1747 visit to Frederick II of Prussia.
That meeting cemented his reputation as the greatest musical intellectual of his time. Frederick II, who is a serious flute player and patron of the arts, challenged Bach to improvise a fugue on a theme the king provided, the Thema Regium.
And Bach's response was immediate and brilliant.
It was. He improvised on the king's theme, even playing on one of the early fortepianos the king owned. But his response didn't end there.
No, he took it home with him.
He did. Once back in Leipzig, he used that theme as the foundation for an entire cycle of fugues, canons, and a trio sonata, titling the collection The Musical Offering and dedicating it to Frederick. This was more than just a musical gift. It was a demonstration of intellectual dominance. He took a simple theme and showed the monarch every possible way it could be manipulated and elevated through counterpoint.
It's truly tragic, then, that this life dedicated to such clear sight to architectural perfection was cut short by blindness and medical malpractice.
It is heartbreaking. Bach's eyesight failed significantly in his final years. In 1750, he underwent 2 separate eye surgeries performed by the itinerant British eye surgeon John Taylor.
And Taylor was a charlatan.
An absolute charlatan. He traveled Europe, promising cures, but left hundreds, if not thousands, blinded, including, tragically, George Friedrich Handel. Bach's death on July 28, 1750, was a result of complications, including a stroke, following these disastrous surgeries.
And the inventory of his estate, it reveals the 2 dominant forces in his life, music and faith.
Absolutely. The inventory listed significant musical assets: 5 harpsichords, 3 violins, 2 lute harpsichords. But equally telling was the listing of 52 sacred books, including volumes by Martin Luther and Josephus. It just confirms that the rigorous, structured approach he applied to counterpoint was fundamentally linked to his deep commitment to Lutheran theology and scholarly learning.
We've established Bach's drive, but now we need to dedicate serious time to the technical core of his genius. Part 3 is the deep dive into Bach's blueprint, how his compositional style fundamentally changed Western music, cementing his status as the progenitor of harmony. And the key concept here seems to be synthesis.
Bach was the ultimate cultural sponge. He didn't invent most of the forms he used, but he enriched established German styles by adapting, integrating, and perfecting foreign influences with unmatched rigor. Specifically, he was indebted to Italy and France.
Okay, so what exactly did he pull from Italy?
From Vivaldi and the Italians, he adopted the propulsive motoric rhythmic patterns, the clear structure of the concerto, and a more defined sense of thematic repetition and contrast. This gave his instrumental music a forward momentum that earlier German styles often lacked. It provided the dynamic energy.
And the French contribution.
The French influence provided elegance and structure. He took forms like the French overture, with its slow, majestic opening followed by a fast, imitative section, and integrated specific dance forms like gavottes, sarabands, and minuets, which you see constantly in his suites.
So he's taking the dynamic energy of Italy and filtering it through the refined organizational structures of France.
And creating something uniquely German in its dense perfection.
Yeah, but the truly revolutionary element was his approach to harmony. Those strange tones back in Arnstadt weren't just random. They were him grappling with the transition from the old modal church music to the modern tonal system.
And that transition is the greatest shift in music history. Bach mastered a new system of tuning the temperament that allowed all 24 keys to be used equally. Before this, keyboard instruments were tuned based on the older mean tone system, which made certain common keys, like C major, sound pure.
But other keys sounded terrible.
Exactly. Distant keys, like F sharp minor, would sound wildly dissonant or out of tune. This meant if a composer wanted to modulate, to move from one key to another, they were severely restricted.
So Bach mastered this new system of well temperament. How did that work?
Well, it essentially distributes the small imperfections in tuning equally across all 12 tones of the octave. So no single key is perfectly pure, but every key is acceptable. It's a compromise.
That is the crucial insight. He sacrificed perfect purity in a few keys for absolute freedom across all 24, and he demonstrated this freedom definitively in the Well-Tempered Clavier.
Yes. The 2 volumes of the Well-Tempered Clavier contain a prelude and a fugue in every single major and minor key. It was a compositional instruction manual, proving that, thanks to this new temperament, you could compose beautifully in F sharp minor just as easily as C major. It was Bach who codified the future of Western music by demonstrating that the modern tonal system was viable and inexhaustible.
His other foundational structural concept was the centrality of 4-part harmony. We see this everywhere, from his chorales to his arrangements.
His harmonic architecture was built around 4 voices: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, or SATB progressing chord to chord according to strict logical rules. This system didn't just support the melody, it created a self-contained, complete musical structure.
And the adaptation of Pergolesi's Steppat Mater is the perfect illustration of this architectural necessity.
It really is. In the 1740s, Bach transcribed Pergolesi's famous work. Pergolesi had used a relatively light 3-part texture, 2 high strings, and a bass line. For Bach, this was incomplete. It left the harmony structurally hollow.
He felt something was missing.
He did. Bach viewed a complete chord as needing all 4 voices to feel fully grounded and balanced, so he added a dedicated independent viola part to fill in that middle harmonic space, adapting the work to his 4-part standard. He felt the need to make the work structurally sound according to his own, more robust tonal ideals.
That choice highlights that Bach wasn't just performing music, he was engineering it. He had this deep intellectual obsession with filling every structural space.
And that obsession extended to elevating instruments traditionally confined to the background, particularly the basso continuo.
For listeners who may not be deeply familiar, the basso continuo was the rhythmic and harmonic foundation of Baroque music, usually a cello and a keyboard providing accompaniment.
Precisely. But Bach refused to let those instruments stay in the background. This is where the term consultante comes in. It means playing as a soloist, or in dialogue with the orchestra, not just providing harmonic filler.
So he brings them to the front.
He does. Starting in the 1720s, Bach had the organ play concertante and cantata movements, treating it as an equal featured voice. He effectively invented the organ concerto, predating Handel's work in the genre by a decade.
He was a key figure in liberating the keyboard.
He was. When he wrote his harpsichord concertos in the 1730s, the harpsichord was no longer just the continuo, it was the star. Furthermore, in his chamber music, like the sonatas for viola da gamba and harpsichord, neither instrument plays a mere continuo part. They are treated as fully independent, equal soloists. This forward-thinking equality between parts is central to understanding his next great contribution. Counterpoint.
Counterpoint and the fugue. This is the intellectual pinnacle of Bach's style. For many listeners, these words mean complexity and density, but Bach somehow manages to make it sound effortless.
Well, counterpoint is defined by distinct, independent melodic lines for each voice or instrument that weave together to form a rich harmonic whole. A fugue is the contrapuntal compositional technique built around a primary musical idea, the subject, which is introduced successively and imitated by all the other voices.
The complexity seems to defy the possibility of maintaining a beautiful melodic line in every part.
That's the magic. His first biographer, Forkel, observed this structural perfection, stating that in Bach's writing, resulting from this melodic interweaving, each part seems to constitute the true melody.
What does that mean exactly?
It means if you take a Bach four-part fugue and you remove the main melody and the bass line, the inner parts, the alto and tenor, still form a compelling, independent, and harmonious melody. It's complete musical engineering where nothing is wasted or relegated to simple filler.
And he often composed music that didn't specify instrumentation, like the art of fugue. That seems counterintuitive for a composer who was such a master of specific instruments.
This instrumentation independence in his later monumental works is highly significant. By leaving the instrumentation ambiguous, especially in the art of fugue, he stripped the music down to its absolute abstract structural essence, the pure relationship between the melodic lines. This versatility was crucial for his later popularity, making his work easily adapted across centuries, from a full orchestra to a jazz quartet.
Finally, we have to tie this structural perfection back to his faith. His complex architecture wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was religious expression.
His dedication to the Lutheran faith was his underlying motor. The Lutheran chorale was the DNA of his sacred music. His large-scale structures, like the St. Matthew Passion, are not simply sequences of musical numbers. They are subtle, elaborately planned architectural expressions of deep theological truths. Even when he was adapting the work of others, his adjustments focused on structure, making minor changes to enhance scene transitions, always prioritizing the overall narrative and architectural perfection.
So we arrive at the great irony of Bach's life. The man who codified the future of Western music saw his own reputation collapse immediately after his death. Let's talk about the 18th century slump.
The slump was swift and serious. When Bach died in 1750, musical tastes were rapidly shifting across Europe. His dense, complex, polyphonic style, where multiple melodies interwove, was deemed old-fashioned, passé. The new trend was the gallant style.
What exactly was the gallant style, and why was it so antithetical to Bach?
The gallant style prioritized simplicity, clarity, and ease of listening. It focused on singable melodies supported by simple, clear homophonic harmony, one main melody line supported by chords. The public and critics found Bach's intricate counterpoint and intellectual density too heavy, too much work.
So he was remembered as a technician, not an artist.
If at all, yes. Primarily as a technical expert and organ virtuoso, not a great composer. It was a very real possibility that much of his legacy would simply disappear.
How was it saved?
Well, his surviving family members inherited the manuscripts, but not all were dedicated to preservation, which led to significant losses. We owe an immense debt to his second eldest son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach.
CPE Bach.
Yes. CPE was the most active keeper of the flame. He co-authored his father's obituary, and crucially, he safeguarded the bulk of the unpublished works, preventing them from being sold off as scraps.
And so the appreciation began to be passed down through these determined connoisseurs and collectors.
This preservation work happened in quiet reverence. The key figure in transmitting this legacy beyond the family was the diplomat and musical enthusiast Gottfried van Swieten.
Van Swieten brought Bach to the attention of the Viennese school, the bedrock of classical music, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven.
Van Swieten was instrumental. He hosted weekly musical soirees in Vienna, where he would often feature the old masters, including Bach and Handel. Haydn owned manuscript copies of the Well-Tempered Clavier. Mozart, after hearing Bach's music performed, immediately started incorporating denser contrapuntal techniques into his own late works.
But Beethoven's connection seems different. It was absolute devotion.
It was a cornerstone of his education. Ludwig van Beethoven learned the well-tempered clavier in its entirety by the age of 11. He famously revered Bach, calling him the Ervater der Harmonie, the progenitor of harmony. This profound respect from the towering figures of the classical era provided the bridge that finally led to the public revival.
The 19th century marks the official start of the Bach revival, bringing his work out of the connoisseurs' living rooms and back onto the stage. What was the absolute catalyst?
There were three key moments. First, the intellectual foundation was laid by Johann Nicholas Forkel's 1802 biography. Second, and the real public-facing catalyst, was Felix Mendelssohn.
And his 1829 performance of the St. Matthew Passion.
A seismic cultural event. The St. Matthew Passion had not been publicly heard for 100 years. Mendelssohn, at only 20 years old, organized and conducted a massively dramatic performance. It was a revelation to the public and precipitated the widespread Bach revival.
And the third major development was institutionalizing his legacy.
Yes. In 1850, a century after his death, the Bach Gesellschaft, the Bach Society, was founded with the mission to promote his music and, most importantly, publish every known work. By the end of the 19th century, the task was complete, and Bach was firmly established as one of the three Bs, alongside Beethoven and Brahms.
The 20th and 21st century saw Bach's music transcend classical boundaries entirely, becoming truly universal.
This is the Renaissance of performance. Think of cellist Pablo Casals, whose recordings in the 1930s popularized the solo cello suites, transforming them from technical studies into masterpieces of expressive depth.
And then Glenn Gould.
Then, in the 1950s, Glenn Gould recorded the Goldberg Variations, transforming that incredibly long, intricate, and previously obscure work into standard piano repertoire. His debut recording sold over 100,000 copies by 1982, astonishing numbers for a dense classical work.
We also see the fascinating contrast between two performance philosophies, the desire for historical accuracy versus total modernization.
This tension perfectly reflects Bach's enduring versatility. On one side, you have the rise of historically informed performance, HIP, playing on period instruments. On the other side, you have grand romantic transcriptions, like Leopold Stokowski's massive orchestration of the toccata and fugue in D minor.
Which most people know as the memorable opening sequence of Disney's Fantasia.
Exactly. He became a universal influence, crossing into jazz, film, and modern composition. Jazz artists like Jacques Lussieu found the perfect foundation for structured improvisation in his work.
But the ultimate sign of his timeless appeal, going beyond Earth's atmosphere, has to be the Voyager Golden Record.
That is the ultimate metaphor for his universality. When NASA prepared a record containing a representative sample of Earth's culture and sent it into space, 3 works by Bach were selected: the Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, a piece from the Violin Partita No. 3, and a prelude and fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier.
So if intelligent life intercepts that record, Bach is one of the first voices they will hear from us.
One of the very first. And here in the 21st century, the acclaim is unequivocal. The New York Times critic Anthony Tomasini ranked Bach the greatest composer of all time in 2011, praising his matchless combination of masterly musical engineering and profound expressivity. His influence is global, digitally archived, and structurally foundational.
So we have mapped the life of Johann Sebastian Bach, the Thuringian workhorse, who used jail time to force a career move, walked hundreds of miles for musical mentorship, endured poverty and tragedy, and yet left behind a legacy defined by perfect, integrated melodic architecture.
His professional life was characterized by relentless strategic maneuvering, but his intellectual life was dedicated entirely to synthesis, scholarship, and structural integrity. He meticulously compiled and revised his major encyclopedic works right up until his death, striving for the final, most perfect expression of every musical form he touched.
It is so powerful to realize that those final, definitive works, the complete Mass in B minor and the Art of Fugue, were never heard in their entirety by the public during his lifetime. He composed them for posterity, for the concept of perfect form, rather than for the immediate consumption that defined his daily job.
And that realization leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Consider Bach's focus in his last years. Knowing his health was rapidly failing, he chose to work almost exclusively on the Art of Fugue. It's a masterpiece of abstract architecture, consisting of 14 fugues and 4 canons, reducing complex counterpoint to its bare, timeless essentials without even specifying the instrumentation.
Just the pure music.
The pure structure. So what does it mean for a composer, knowing the end is near, to focus entirely on the pure, timeless intellectual structure of music over its public, emotional, or liturgical function? Was this final act of structural mastery a dedication to posterity and offering to God, or simply the ultimate satisfaction of his own scholarly obsession with form itself?